topic is information system for the absorption parameters and diffusion in NanoPorous. It was done in collaboration between the team of scientists of the Grenoble National University and our colleagues in the Sorbonne University, France. So it's well known that scientists utilize mathematical models to study the complex physical objects to take the benefits of math and computer science. And our team have actually the history and the bunch of the researchers made for these topics. And the goal of the current research was to actually combine the mathematical model, the theory of optimal control, and the benefits or advantages of the software engineering to build information system for the absorption parameter identification. So let me start from the ground, and actually in the core of our research is a mathematical model. And we believe that the diffusion process can be described as a system of two partial equations. Actually, first equation is the relation of the concentration in the intraparticle space, and the second one is the concentration inside the small particles, which have the small parts as well and keep the mass too. So as these equations are accomplished by the initial conditions, the boundary conditions, and in case of the heterogeneous media, which could have a different features in different parts of the media, we could have the contact conditions which actually allow us to define this heterogeneous nature of most of the real materials. So the second part is actually how we can build a solution of this model. So one of the proposals is to apply the numerical solutions and use the Krohn-Nicholson schema to do that. And we split actually our area or domain of the functions into the small parts, actually into the three directions, the direction for this the x, and the time. And after the transformations of our initial mathematical model using the Krohn-Nicholson schema, we obtained the equations 7 and 8. And the orthogonal grid looks like the following. Having this in mind and doing some algebraic, some transformations or manipulations, we came to the equation 9 and 10, which actually is the linear equations, which can be combined into the system, and actually applying the iterative process of Thomas algorithm to the system allow us to determine the concentrations in intraparticle and extraparticle spaces at the next level, time level, using the information from the previous levels. Actually, we apply it iterationally and build the cube of the values. Now, going to the next part is actually experimental studies, and our partners in the Sorbonne, they actually did the experiments, the real experiments on the real materials with the equipment, and collect concentrations for the hexane and benzene extraction on this zeolite DSM-5. Unfortunately, this experiment is quite expensive, and they can't apply them or repeat them very frequently, so they can do only some of them. And it's actually our main goal to get the most from this experiment and to be able to share this information on other researchers. So actually, our idea was to use the experiment studies in combination with the mathematical model and numerical solution of this model, and try to identify the kinetic features of this process, which can be multiply reused in different numerical simulations. So what we did, we actually take the ideas from the theory of optimal control and use the gradient method to identify the distribution of diffusion coefficients. According to this method, the involved gradient identification procedure is used to determine the next approximation of the diffusion coefficient. So I mean, by next, it's the next step because it's iteration process. And we repeat it again and again till we not get the sufficient difference between what we predict with what is real. And in that, when we stopped, and actually we can tell that, okay, we identify the coefficient with such precision. And actually the function residual determines the deviation of the desired solution of its traces. Having that, actually, we create the software and did the diffusion coefficient identification using the proposed method. And the second, on the left, is actually we, using the obtained coefficients, we simulate absorption curve and compare it with the experiments. And as you can see, it's pretty much correlated. So there are two graphs, 1 and 2, and they're very close to each other. This means that our coefficients was identified pretty precise, and it allows us to recreate the mass curve with the same precision. Also, during doing these experiments, we did it for different points of times. Actually, how it was strictly connected to the experimental studies that we get as the inputs. And there are a lot of different insights we found, but one of the insights, actually, it's related to the diffusion coefficients evolution. And what we can see is that these coefficients, they not only have different values moving from the top to the bottom of the media, but itself they vary in time. So when we take different process times, the first example is the initial phase of the diffusion process when the zeolite is full of gas. And moving forward till we reach the state of the equilibrium, we see that the coefficients also not stable and they change in values. So what we see is that coefficients both have different values for different parts of the zeolite, and also they evolve during the process itself. And the conclusion and the information system for identifying and studying parameters of complex absorption and diffusion processes in heterogeneous media of microporous particles has been implemented. The direct and conjugate problems of coefficient identification in intraparticle space are formulated, and the identification algorithm of kinetic parameters using the gradient methods and numerical solution was built. The adequacy of the results obtained from the identification process was validated against the experimental observations. Furthermore, the numerical solution and analysis of the kinetics of absorptions, as well as the concentration gradient fields, was conducted. The results of the study enable efficient simulation of absorption process kinetics and can be further utilized for the exploration of the equilibrium conditions in complex systems under the influence of various factors.